everyone. Okay, so we're wrapping up Reconstruction in this series of videos and discussing the impact of the Civil War on the southern states. So here we go. So in this video series, we're going to continue with Reconstruction, talking about the end of it and also how it affected the southern states. By 1870, the Union was pieced back together again. And if you think about it, so this is probably about 5 years after the war has ended. African Americans are granted citizenship and the right to vote. So millions of Southern black men are now able to vote. And the result is that they elect quite a few black officials into government positions. And the Republican Party gains a lot of strength from this group of voters. So African Americans, for the first time, are able to use political power. Scalawag this is a term, it's kind of a derogatory term, for a Southern white man who voted for the Republican Party. So scalawag is a negative term that describes someone who is kind of a betrayer of Southern values. Most white Southerners viewed the Scalawags as traitors to the South. And it gave the hated Republican Party even more strength in the South. And that's one reason why they were so disliked. So you have people in the South who are supporting the Republican Party, these Scalawags, and it's giving the Republican Party more strength in the South. We also have carpetbaggers in the South. This is another derogatory term. It's a term for Northerners who came to the South looking for economic or political gain. So after the Civil War, of course, the South was a mess. Large parts of the South had been virtually destroyed. Their economy was in shambles. And some people in the North saw this as an opportunity to potentially make money. So these were known as carpetbaggers, and they were actually named for the bags that they frequently carried were kind of cheap materials often made from carpets. So this is how they got their name. Southerners viewed them as opportunists, obviously, trying to make a fortune off the devastated Southern economy. There were successes and failures in Reconstruction. In the South, women had the opportunity to gain education and work in areas where they had never worked before. So the medical field, child care, relief work, which was huge. If you remember, we had the Freedmen's Bureau, and women were heavily involved in that. In terms of failures, of course, we have a segregated society. Schools were segregated between blacks and whites. Education was not very good in the South, especially for African Americans. And of course, there's racial violence still in the South. The KKK and white leagues are still prominent and effective groups in the South. You had, when the Emancipation Proclamation came about from Lincoln, you had a lot of African Americans who were just released from their hardships and slavery and turned loose into society. And with this freedom, of course, they have to start from scratch. They have nothing. In slavery, they did have food and shelter. Now they don't even have that. So there are many hardships for the freed African Americans. They don't have money, they don't have jobs or shelter, poor food and housing, and many are still working the land that they were working as slaves, but they're working it for someone else. In the years after the Civil War, the South is focused on rebuilding their economy. Despite the fact that African Americans had been freed as slaves, most of the southern land was still owned by wealthy white men. And this leaves many landless white and black people, and they really are reduced to three options in terms of working land. One is sharecropping, 2 is share tenancy, and 3 is tenant farming. And I'll explain each of those. Sharecropping is a system where landowners determine which crop will be grown. Okay, so they tell the person working the land what they're going to farm. The landowner, in turn, provides a place for the farmer to live, as well as seed and tools that are needed for farming. The farmer would receive a small share of the harvested crop in payment, and he would give the rest to the landowner. The problem with sharecropping is that the landowner frequently had to use credit to buy supplies, and he simply passed this cost along to the sharecropper, who was always in debt. This system was often just as bad, maybe even worse, than slavery. Share tenancy is similar to sharecropping, except that the farmer chooses the crop to be grown. So the person working the land this time chooses what crop it is they're going to grow. The farmer also buys their own supplies, so their own seed, their own tools, and it allows the farmer a little bit more control, both of his livelihood and of his money. Tenant farming is kind of like paying rent. So the farmer essentially rents the land from the landowner, and the farmer was free to do whatever he wanted with the land. He could plant whatever crops he wanted. That was up to him. This was more rare because typically a farmer, had to already have the money to rent the land, and this wasn't the case with most African Americans who'd been freed from slavery. To go back to the issue of scalawags and carpetbaggers for a moment, these derogatory terms indicate the Southerners' resentment for the Republican Party. They really don't like having Union troops in their states, making sure that the laws of the Union are enforced. And they are, of course, struggling to make ends meet in the harsh economic conditions that they've been left with after the Civil War. So groups like the KKK are quite prevalent. There are people who are outwardly expressing their animosity for the Republicans and their beliefs. These groups use terrorism against African Americans in particular, but also anyone who supports African Americans or African American rights. The government responds to groups like the KKK. They try to curb the violence. The KKK is very busy using intimidation tactics for burning buildings, lynching people, and Congress tries to restrict this with enforcement acts. And this made it against the law to interfere with any citizen's right to vote. It did help reduce violence at the polls, but it certainly did not eliminate it. So that's it for this video. We'll talk about the effects of Reconstruction at the end of Reconstruction in the next video.